It was 1961 in the Tetons in Wyoming. And we were working for the same company at the restaurant at the Coulter Bay Lodge. She was the cashier and I was the general supervisor of the feeding line, the cafeteria line. And so she would total up the totals. If there were any disputes about the food, then she would ask me about it, and we would then have to count the cash at the end and balance the day's receipts and send them to the bank. What else you want to say?
You actually did quite well. By now it was my third summer of working during the summer months to raise the money for school, and so I had arrived in that area about 2 weeks before Ray came, and at that point, inasmuch as I was by that time the head cashier, had responsibility for the monies, so I just graduated and got an associate in science in business. And as a result of that, I had established kind of a spreadsheet of how to do an accounting for the monies so that I made sure that I was in balance every day. And so close to the end of a lunchtime shift, because we would do morning lunch and the evening meal, and close to the end of that we did not have a whole lot of business right at that time, and so I was kind of studying this sheet. And Mr. Eckhart, who had the responsibility, was the general manager for the area, walked in with a young man, and he said, "I would like to introduce you to the man who is ultimately going to be your boss." He then introduced me to Ray. We chatted for just a few minutes, and then more people were coming through the line. And so that was the end of the conversation, and then that continued, and then after things kind of quieted down, Ray came back over and he said, "What is it that you're studying?" And I explained it to him, and he said, "Well, could I look at it for just a few minutes?" And I said, "Certainly." So he looks at that and he comes back and he said, "This is good, but there is a better way to do it. And tonight I will show you how that is." And I thought, oh good, we're going to get off real swell here. But as a result, his was a great idea. It was a wonderful idea of how to look at the numbers at the end of every day. If you had a certain number of people that came through the line, then you would average out what a meal would cost so that you would know whether or not anybody was tapping the till. And it was a more accurate way of doing the accounting. And so that kind of continued. So at the end of every day, we had to balance out the cash together. And after about 6 weeks, he said, "Donna," he said, "I would really quite like to kiss you." I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No." But I said, "I can't do that because I would betray a trust. And until you remove the diamond on your finger, I cannot do that. Would you consider returning that diamond?" I said, "I don't know. I really have to think about that." So I went home that evening and I prayed a good part of the night. And I thought about it and thought about it. Well, my matters of the heart was my uncle. And so I called my uncle the next morning and I said, "Uncle Dale, what do I do?" And he said, "Well, tell me more about these two individuals in your life." So we talked that through. And he said, "What are his great strengths?" And I said, "Well, he's a spiritual giant. I don't come anywhere close to that." And he said, "Well, what else about him is good?" And I said, "Well, I said, we really are on the same thought pattern when it comes to handling finances." And he said, "Honey," he says, "I haven't shared with you that I'm going through a divorce right now." And he said, "Our ultimate problem is money." And he said, "If you have found somebody that you think alike in terms of money, I think you ought to think very seriously about your decision." I said, "Yeah, but I break this engagement. He has never mentioned marriage. He has never even, I don't even know if he would really be interested in going out with me." And he said, "Honey, I think you better think that through very seriously." So I called the other young man, had him come, we talked. And then unbeknownst to me, he went over and talked with Ray. And I don't really know what your conversation was, but within a 24-hour period of time, the ring was gone. We started to date at that point, and nothing too serious. We just had a good time, really had a good time. Nothing really romantic. And about a month later, I was sitting again in the same place, and Ray walks up behind me, and it's very busy, and he leans down and he whispers, and he said, "What temple do you want to be married in?" And I said, What? And he just smiled and turned and walked away. And I thought, oh my gosh. And so about, a week later, we went into Jackson Hole for dinner. Remember that night?
Mm-hmm.
I was wearing a red dress. The waitress came. The very first thing they brought us was some tomato juice, and she promptly dumped it in my lap. And I thought, oh, wonderful way to start the evening. Anyway, we progressed from there. And so later that evening, we drove back, maybe 40 miles, was it, back to Calder Bay, stopped by Jackson Lake Lodge, and he asked me to marry him. And I was really happy to say yes. And so we worked for another month there, and then came to where my father was in Brigham City, talked to my dad. And then about a week later, we were on Temple Square, and he said, honey, I've got to go take care of some business. I won't be gone long. Why don't you just go through the visitor center, and then I'll come back. So he did, and we walked around more of the Temple Square and stopped in front of the Aaronic priesthood statue. And he asked me again to marry him and gave me a ring. So it was wonderful. We were married on the 15th of November on his birthday, 28th birthday.
49 years ago.
49 years ago this year, this week.